I guess I have it now. That's what it was. Okay.
Sorry. I don't see you. Are you logged in?
It's recording.
Do you see me?
Nope. Participants, nope.
Okay. I don't understand. I guess log in with the guest.
Which one are you? Are you on the meeting ID 83342?
I'm on the one you sent, 8169.
No, that's a different one.
I didn't have another one. Was a new one sent?
Mm-mm. And this is recording. So, you know, I logged in the way that that Gmail
Yeah.
password.
Isn't that the meeting? 8109?
This is no, so he must have two different ones on here, because one is I teach Taoist practice, Qigong and Qigong. I think that's for that on Tuesdays. But for Wednesday, you will go to Zoom. This is for me.
Okay.
And this is the one that you would log on to, which is the right here, 833. And you need to change that. 424-33867.
Hold on. You probably need to re-forward it to people then.
Yeah.
But for this purpose. And just leave this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, what am
I
I?
think it will be this one here.
That's not Tuesdays?
No, this if you see this, it's up under for BIPOC Wednesdays. You will log on to this, and then it's this here.
Okay.
Did you get it?
No, I couldn't type that fast.
Sorry.
Can you read it to me, please?
833-424-33867.
108, I guess it's password stuff.
I believe so. Healers Unite 108.
Yeah, I see you.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move forward with this. And see how that works. Which is fine. Hey, hello.
Hey,
I guess we'll just go ahead and move forward with it. Yeah, unfortunately, the technical difficulties, prayerfully, we've surmounted those, or moved past those, as I would say. But I'm gonna move forward with the session either way. I know it's just us two. I see that it's being recorded, so. Let me just say welcome, welcome. I appreciate you showing up. And you know, it's just a blessing, first of all, just to be here, and truly being thankful that an opportunity such as this, being able to have a conversation talking about suffering in ways in which we could liberate ourselves from this suffering, is truly a blessing. Again, I can't overemphasize that. But before we get started, one of the first things that I always like to do, in the spirit of recognizing and knowing that our ancestors are always with us. It's interesting, the more that I even do my own research as relates to understanding even trauma, the generational trauma that we deal with, knowing that the trauma that our ancestors experienced, and there are ways in which we live out some of those traumatic experiences in our everyday life ourselves. And so, you know, it's interesting to see how science now is catching up with something that's been around for, you know, eons, as it relates to being able to communicate with those who have walked before, and to know that they're in us, they're not outside of us, right? Where I think most people would like to believe, but it's something inside of us. And once we are able to acknowledge them and bring them forward, they do come forward. They're with us. They're wanting us to call them forward, to allow us to find ways in which we can handle things that maybe we don't know how to handle in this life that we find ourselves living right now. And so in this space, in this time, if you choose to call out an ancestor, or if you want to, you know, within your heart, within your mind, invoke that spirit of that particular ancestor, have them be with us in this space now, as we move to always look to heal ourselves, to be better versions of ourselves, to be able to live a life that is free from suffering. And we know that those who have walked before us may be able to and will show us ways in which we could overcome and deal with a lot of these pains and traumas that we find ourselves dealing with. And I will call forward now the spirit of my grandmother, Grandeline Williams. I ask that she be here. And I ask those ancestors who will give me more insight as to how I continue to manage, continue to overcome, and continue to liberate myself from my own personal suffering that I find myself dealing with. I ask that you be here in this present moment. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Oh, okay, thanks. So, today's topic is dealing with, and I'm gonna put my timer on right now. is the way to end suffering. And I think it's important from a historical context to understand that, you know, throughout time, there have been a lot of teachers, a lot of heroes and sheroes who have shown us ways, who have planted seeds, if you will, to show us ways in which we can be better at evolving to a place where we could be more liberated in our existence here on earth. Today, specifically, we're going to talk about the Buddha, the awakened one, Siddhartha, Gautama. And the thing that I really appreciate about his particular method or way or path is, number one, the level of in-depthness that he has surrounding understanding the mind and understanding the body. And it is through understanding the mind and understanding the body are ways in which we're able to end this particular suffering that we find ourselves dealing with. And to know that, you know, he came up with this over 2,500 years ago is just very fascinating, in the sense that, you know, although it was 2,500 years ago, clearly not as, you know, technologically savvy as we are today, but the same issues that we deal with psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, are some of the same ways by which we could find, let me back up, I don't want to not say that correctly, but the ways in which they went about solving those psychological, emotional issues are really in truth the same way that we could solve our current modern day issues that we find ourselves dealing with. And that is just, you know, phenomenal that this man, this being, was able to, through his experience, to be able to develop a cohesive path or way by which you can stop suffering. And, you know, I like to talk about my own experience about, you know, studying, whether it be different religions and following different paths. This is probably, up to this point in my evolution, the most simplest or simplistic way that I've found that's very comprehensive in the way that you go about relieving that suffering of the mind and the body. And, you know, it's interesting, back in 2004, when I first did the Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, which is, you know, mindfulness meditation, which was founded by the Buddha. You know, I would have never known, first of all, that that path had such a significant part to play in the healing, if you will, of my own personal transformation mentally. One of the things that stand out, what he said, or the teacher that was teaching it at the time, was that there was going to be a psychological surgery that was going to take place. And true indeed, it was a psychological surgery that was taking place during that time. I just remember, you know, through that experience, and it was 10 days, which was beautiful. You know, I didn't have to pay for it, but it was a 10-day retreat. And you're there to learn this technique. And there was this noble silence. You know, you couldn't talk. The only time that you were authorized to speak was when you were speaking with the teacher about a concern or a question that you may have about the practice. And so really it was time really spent alone, right, with yourself. And, you know, looking to learn the technique of mindfulness practice or insight meditation, as it were. But I remember just from a physical perspective, I had this growth that came on the side of my face. It probably stayed there like 2 days. And it was such a trip because, you know, and I must say, going through the training itself was very rigorous for me during that time. Although I had done some meditation, nothing to this extent, nothing, you know, remotely close to this extent of just being by myself, you know, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, meditating from 5 all the way down to 9 o'clock, you know, with, you know, periodic breaks throughout the day. But, you know, it was definitely a challenge for me to, number one, be able to sit still. And then number two, to be able to learn and apply some of the techniques that I was learning throughout that training. But, you know, again, I'll never forget that physical growth, if you will, that came on the side of my face. But fortunately, like 2 days after that, it finally began to dissipate and went away. But I just remember even leaving the meditation session, you know, having this feeling and sense of peace and calm. I remember getting in my truck at the time, and I was playing this music. There's this artist by the name of Dwight Tribble, and he was singing this song called Peace. And it was like sort of, well, I guess it was a cappella. And he was singing it, and just the tone and the way that he was hitting those notes at that time just really hit my soul in such a way to where I just started flooding with these tears, man. It was such an experience that I'll never forget. And I know it was a part of coming out of that practice. It opened up my mind, it opened up my heart, it opened up my being in such a way that I was very receptive and in touch and in tune with those forces in that moment, the music. It just had such a profound effect on my being. And I knew right then, I said, you know, this is a path. This is definitely a way that I need to stay with in order to continue to practice. And, you know, like most people, you know, I probably did it consistently, maybe 3 months, 4 months, and then I began to fall off. You know, then from time to time, I would come back and, you know, meditate again, but it wasn't the same way that I did initially when I came out of the retreat for the 3 to 4 months. But it wasn't until maybe, 2 years ago, once I went through mindfulness teacher certification training, where I really began to apply the practice consistently in my life. And I can tell you, just, you know, the practice itself has just truly been very powerful, very powerful. So I say all that as a precursor to talk about this way to end suffering. And, you know, one of the ways in which the Buddha began to teach this way to end suffering, he started off with explaining the 4 noble truths, right? The first truth is the truth that there is suffering, right? I don't know any kind of way that I don't think you can get past not acknowledging that there's suffering in the world. And it's not just pain and sorrow, although that's part of it, but it's just, the unsatisfactoriness, if you will, of life as it is, brings about the suffering. And then the second noble truth is the cause of suffering. What causes the suffering that we find ourselves dealing with? Specifically, the aversions. I'm sorry, the cravings that we find ourselves craving on a day in and day out basis. And then third, he talked about the cessation, the stopping of the suffering that we find ourselves dealing with. And then finally, it was a path leading to liberation. And the path leading to liberation, leading away from suffering, is the Eightfold Noble Path. And really, in truth, the Eightfold Noble Path is what the Dharma talks are generally all about. The Eightfold Noble Path talks about right view, having right view. Before I even go through the list of each of the path itself, they would categorize each of the paths or the views. I'm sorry, not the views, but the noble truths. There we go. So let's say, for instance, like the first two, right view and right intention would be categorized with wisdom, right? Because it's through having right view and right intention, this develops this kind of clarity that you need to continue down the Eight Noble Path, of having an understanding or clear understanding of what the other or all the eight are about. And then the next three will be dealing with specifically the morals or the disciplines, right? In essence, dealing with right speech, also having right action, and also embellishing right livelihood, and then the final category with that would be the concentration. And the concentration would be the right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And it is really in truth with the concentration piece that you're able to sit and be with yourself in such a way where you're able to look at and understand the suffering that's occurring within the person, right? And let's say, for instance, if you're sitting in meditation, and it's through meditation where you're able to focus in on the four foundations. The first foundation would be the feelings, for instance, being aware of the different feelings that you find yourself experiencing. Then the emotions, right? What kind of emotions are you going through? Are they pleasant, neutral, or negative, right? And being aware of how this is affecting your body. Being aware, another foundation is being aware of the body. What's happening with the body? Understanding, again, what it's doing. Why is it tense, right? And then also the final foundation of that will be the hindrances, me being like the different phenomena that you find yourself dealing with, whether it be, laziness or just different characteristics that you've developed throughout your life. Being mindful of those is definitely one of the ways in which you begin to start on this journey of healing yourself. And I noticed you just typed, should you ask questions? Sure. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good question.
All right. I wanted to respect all this wisdom you were dropping, but I did have questions.
Sure.
So I know you mentioned through, is concentration one of the eightfold paths?
Yes.
Okay.
Right concentration. Absolutely.
Okay. So through right concentration, which is achieved through meditation, if I'm understanding, it helps open you up to the other noble paths.
Right. And here's the thing about this. It's the way that I understand it is you don't have to go through each one of them like a tier system.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
They're all interconnected. So like having right concentration, right view, right intention, right speech, all of them are like synchronized in such a way to where, whatever one you decide to deal with um, is or will be beneficial for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason that they have it in the particular order is, and it makes sense if you think about it, I think it's important to have a certain sense of wisdom to understand that you have to have a right view. Let's say, because that's not the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The right view emboldens or encourages right intention.
Right.
Right? To want to have right speech.
Mm-hmm.
Right? To want to have the right action and a right livelihood and so on and so forth.
It's like building blocks on each other.
It is like building blocks. But again, the way that I understand it is that, one is not as important than the other. All of them are integral as it relates to establishing a strong foundation to begin to do the work of exploring who and what we are, psychologically, and even, physiologically, and I think that's the thing that I realize more so than anything else. It's not just a mental surgery, although there's a lot of mental investigation that's happening. And I think that's the important thing. We have to understand there's so much that's happening in our mind. And the way that the Buddha talked about what was happening, it's all predicated upon this level of ignorance because we don't know any better, right? And he talks about these mental defilements. And he talked about three specifically. He talked about greed. He talked about aversions to things such as anger, irritation, hatred, violence. He also talked about delusion, how I think he put it like the dark cloak, if you will, over our minds, in the sense that, it is through that illusion that we don't understand the truth as it is. And so the way by which we address those mental defilements is through this eightfold noble path, right? And it is through this investigation And it is through cultivating wisdom as we investigate. Because ignorance is, not knowing. We want to know. We want to know the truth. We want to see it as it is, not what we fabricate, not what we create every day. And I know we do that. And I do that, right? Yeah. And so being able to get to the root cause of the problem is really in truth where the healing begins to take place. I always like to utilize the analogy of this 12-step program. One of the first steps to healing yourself is, first of all, acknowledging that you got a problem, right? And it is through that acknowledgement that you're able to develop a systematic approach to addressing those various multiple concerns that we find ourselves experiencing every day, and this noble eightfold path is a systematic way by which you address those mental, psychological concerns honestly. I think the way that they call it, which is very fascinating about the Buddha, because he taught this technique for 45 years. He wasn't teaching Buddhism. He was teaching, in essence, he was teaching you the truth of suffering, its causes, and how to end suffering and the path by which you do that. That's what he was teaching. And I know a lot of times people get caught up, particularly here in the West, well, if you're not following this particular faith, well, I don't really want to hear what you got to say, right? But the reality is, as I see it, if someone is offering you some medicine, I don't care who's going to give me some medicine. If it's going to heal me, if it's going to make me begin to turn around and move in such a way where I'm whole, where I'm psychologically whole, where I began to understand that a lot of this suffering that I'm imposing is really me imposing it on myself. And I think a lot of times it's easy for us to say externally what's causing us problems, whether it be the system, whether it be our loved ones. But the reality at the end of the day, it's you, it's us. And once we begin to turn around and shift the way that we look at our suffering, we begin to come from a place of wholeness. We begin to come from a place of right view, to begin to address, again, those things that are basically causing the suffering. So where am I? Yeah, I was actually speaking on that for a while. What I want to do, because it was interesting, even after the Buddha himself became enlightened, right after he became enlightened, there were some words that are now like very profound that he had said, and I want to share those with you right now. He said that, I travel through the rounds of countless births, seeking but not finding the builder of this house. Sorrowful is birth again and again. O house builder, you have now been seen. You will build no house again. Your rafters, being the defilements, have been broken. Your ridgepole, which is ignorance, shattered. My mind has attained the unconditioned. Achieved is the end of craving. And I think when I look at how I've really began to address those issues that are causing my own suffering, it is the craving, right? It is those, because we live in the West, we've been conditioned to embolden our ego in such a way to be the best, right? And whether it be cravings through sensual pleasures or a certain status in life, to have certain material gains, right? All of these ultimately, if we don't get them, will cause a level of suffering in our lives. And I think it's important for us to address our own individual cravings, obviously, to begin to see, well, how do I stop this? How do I stop this cycle of what they call this rebirth is samsara, which is this continuation of coming back to experience the same kind of suffering over and over and over again. And it is through that delusion that he talked about, that Maya, that we create, that we fabricate ourselves, that we live and exist in this way of suffering that really in truth does not need to, we don't have to suffer this way.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to suffer this way, but it is until we remove that level of ignorance and begin to cultivate again that wisdom, and being still and knowing is only the time that we will begin again the journey or the path towards liberation, real liberation and freedom, or as they call it, nirvana, being free of suffering, which is very profound, in ways. And I know just, even personally, how there are moments and times whereby just through my practice, I'm developing better mastery of how I exist in the world, by looking at some of those, psychological cravings and clingings that I've adopted, and being able to pivot and turn around and say, no, I don't need to do this, And I think it's that level of control that I'm looking to have more mastery of as I continue to exist. Yes. Yeah. So, did you have any questions surrounding that?
No, actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking about how today I experienced some of that, because I do tend to cause suffering for myself. And so, there was a situation today where I found myself, projecting into the future and worrying about, well, what if this happens and then I have to do this, or what if this doesn't happen and now I'm going to have to do this? And I found myself going down this rabbit hole and getting more anxiety filled about the situation. And then I remembered to just stop and to, take a moment to breathe and to be in the present and to realize that I can only control what I know what is, like what's now. And so I kind of had to, I guess, talk myself through that moment. And as you were speaking, I was just reflecting on some of the tools that I was using in that moment to like get back to a state of peace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a very powerful tool to be able to have,
Mm-hmm.
is to know when you're in it, and to be able to stop and pivot. Because yeah, ultimately what's going to happen, you go deeper and deeper into that rabbit hole, and you're causing more grief, more angst,
Right.
more suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and it is through being able to recognize that, where again, the grace and the love of healing is able to occur. I think a lot of times, I know for me, I believe that what's happening is real. Again, talking about that delusion, right? But really, in truth, it's through my experience. It's through the lens of the perceptions of what I believe are true, right? I like to also talk about, it's like looking through a kaleidoscope, right? As you look through a kaleidoscope, there are like thousands of ways to be able to look at one object. But is the way that you're looking at that particular object truth?
Right.
Or right and exact?
Mm-hmm.
And
someone also shared with me the phrase, nothing is permanent. And so that was also going through my mind as well. It's like, this is just a for the moment situation. I'm going to handle it. It'll pass on to the next,
That's so powerful. It reminds me of the biblical scripture, this too shall pass,
Exactly.
Which is true. Bringing it back to even mindfulness meditation itself, the science behind mindfulness, when you think about, if you're sitting in meditation, for instance, right? The objective in mindfulness is to allow whatever sensation to be what it is, to be in the moment without judging it. As you just said, the impermanence of everything. So even from that microcosmic perspective in meditation, right, there's a grander macrocosmic perception or even perspective when we go out into the world. It's the same exact thing. So what we do on the mat, is, and I think I've said this last time, is our homework. But what we do out into the world is our field work, right? And so when we go out into the world, and if we're in a moment where we're feeling imbalanced or we're suffering, understand that that moment really in truth is impermanent. It's not real. It's fleeting. Even from a psychological, philosophical perspective, it is just that. It's not real. And so it's what you said before about being able to stop and pivot and recognize that you don't have to stay on that wheel of suffering if you don't want to recognize what it is, to see the truth of your thinking, that you're ruminating, that you're going down a rabbit hole, utilizing your words, and stop it. No, I don't need to go down this hole. And that to me is the simplicity of it. But a lot of times it's very difficult when we're in the moment to stop, because again, we think that it's real. We're thinking that it's real. And again, the more that I practice, the more that, this path, this way, it just resonates, and the thing that, he talks about specifically is, well, number one, you have to know what the path is, right? But beyond just knowing the path, it's through your experience of that true investigation that you really begin to heal. So you can talk about it after you have gone through it. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
I think there's one thing to conceptually understand it, But there's again, I am from the country, and they talk about, there's this old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And that's what I'm saying here. It's like, I guess I can utilize that analogy.
I was actually thinking about when my parents used to say, one day you'll understand, because, you're right. Like, you don't truly embrace a situation and know the full workings of a situation until you actually walk through it yourself.
Right. Right. I mean, you just have another perspective.
You do, yeah.
And again, I'm bringing up biblical scripture. When I was a child, I thought as a child.
Yeah.
I did childish things, but once I became a man, I put away those childish things. And it's, if you think about it, well, this is what life is a lot of times for us. It's like we will identify a situation as being so real and not have the tools whereby we're able to, again, fix ourselves out of that situation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think that's important to always remember. What we think is real right now, especially if it's causing some level of angst and pain and suffering, is to recognize, well, number one, investigate, well, why am I thinking this? Where are these feelings coming from?
Uh-huh.
And I think, that's the beauty when I think about it from a perspective of this cognitive therapy behavior. You begin to address trauma. You have to look at it. You have to face it, and it's through that facing, is through the acknowledging of what's happening where you begin to really start the healing. It's all about healing for me. It's all about healing.
The psychological surgery.
Absolutely. The psychological surgery. And, when I think about, our people specifically, there's so much that we're dealing with and struggling with, not just externally, which, from systemic racism to, we see right now on the news what's happening with this whole George Floyd case. Although I haven't been keeping up with the news, I did tune in the other day just to see what was happening with that trial. But the fact that we have to deal with that, the fact that we have to deal with generational trauma, historical trauma, personal trauma, there's a lot. There is a lot. And, most of us, a lot of us don't have the insurance to be able to go and sit down with the therapist to help us walk through ways in which we can start this journey to heal ourselves. And so my thing is, well, let's go back to ourselves. Let's go back to calling on those ancestors, right? To help us, be with these traumas that we find ourselves dealing with. And it's through acknowledging that, being honest and truthful with that, again, that we begin this journey towards liberation. Yeah. I didn't even do a lot of talking there, but
no, I mean, it's you're right. It's so necessary. Even you brought up, the Floyd case, and I have been watching periodically, but it just creates such overwhelming feelings of sorrow and despair, and almost it makes me question humanity, and the fact that we even have to have a trial for someone to defend that action. It makes me question humanity, and that makes me very sad, and it brings up all of these feelings about my Black body and how that's perceived in the world and how that's perceived as a threat a lot of the times to
Sure.
other people. So you're right, like, you know, those feelings, in addition to everything else, we walk with, it's a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
But the love, you know, and to acknowledge that, first of all, absolutely, absolutely. Um, but one of the things that always come to mind when I think about all the stuff that we find ourselves dealing with collectively as a people, what always stands out is resilience.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Resilience,
Mhm.
you know, and you know, for us to be able to endure as much as we have to deal with,
Mhm.
and still keep on keeping on, you know, that within itself, you know, invokes this sense of pride,
Yeah.
lets me know that, you know, really in truth, we are, although it may not seem like it in a lot of instances, you know, the spirit of us being together is still there for me.
Mhm.
You know, I don't know if that's the ancestors calling and saying that, in my being, in the makeup of who I am as a person. You know, me being a little bit older, my perceptions about our connectedness as a people may be a little bit different from the Xers, these millennial folk. Um, you know, I always hold on to the concept of the idea that, you know, the Ubuntu, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. You know, African proverb. We are all in this thing together, and it does take a village, and it does take us collectively to work collectively, and even beyond race. You know,
Mhm.
when you talk about the human species, you know, all of us have to ultimately be in this thing together.
Absolutely.
You know,
Even out beyond, you know, mankind, you know, the
right.
world is interconnected.
That's right. That's right. That's right. You know, so I didn't mean to pontificate, but you know, these are obviously some of these thoughts, um, that I think you begin to look at from a deeper, more grounded perspective once you start to really go inside, you
Mhm.
know, and reflect, you know, and to be more mindful of what's happening, with yourself. So, I know we're actually at this time, to close this out. So, um, it's interesting. I think about it. Did we do a meditation?
We did not,
I missed the meditation.
but I'd love to close with one.
Yeah, let's go ahead and close with the meditation. Let's definitely close with the meditation. So, if we could find a comfortable, upright position where your spine is erect. And as you continue to align your spine, settle down in your seat, feeling your sit bones connected to the cushion that you're on. Slowly bring your attention to your breath. Whether you're noticing the rise and fall of your belly, or the sensations that are coming through your nostril, the coolness that's coming in on the inhalation, and the warmth that's going out on the exhalation. But just being mindful of that breath. allowing the body to relax, to soften. If there is any tension in the neck, shoulders, release. And feel the ever-present breath throughout the body. If the mind happens to wander, lovingly and gently come back to the breath. As we slowly begin to come out of this meditation, being mindful of the calming, centering energy presence that was generated, allow this same energy and spirit to be with you as you continue throughout your evening. As we begin to slowly open our eyes, we acknowledge the great presence of spirit that's with us. And we ask that that spirit continue to nurture and heal us as we continue to do or evolve to be better versions of who we are. Give thanks. We give thanks. Thank you for being with me, us.
Thank you so much for sharing for this session. I truly appreciate it.
It's all love. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. Good night.
Good night.